Hi, welcome everyone. We're so thrilled you are joining us for Sustaining a Critical Stance on Language and Identity in Learning Spaces with Bilingual and Multilingual Children. This is the Educator Collaborative Gathering. Make sure you are using the hashtag #EdCollabGathering. Follow us on social media, and we'll be so excited to interact with you as this recording airs live, and as maybe afterwards we can keep in touch that way. I'm Carla España. I use she, her pronouns. I'm really just super thankful, and I feel honored that I get to share this space with other fabulous educators who are joining us. I am currently a middle grade educator, language arts teacher in 7th and 8th, and dean at a school in New York. And I'm joined here by...
Hi, everybody. My name is Herrera, and I'm an assistant professor of bilingual education at California State University, Channel Islands. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela McKay. I am a Spanish teacher in Providence, Rhode Island. High school Spanish teacher in Providence, Rhode Island. And I am also thrilled to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Jen Lopez. I teach Heritage Spanish. I just started teaching English this year, and I teach AP Spanish Literature as well at Cristo Rey in Minneapolis.
So we have all kinds of educators. We have middle grade represented, high school represented, also teacher education. I think before we get started, just real quick, what is everyone reading or watching or listening to on this topic that's sustaining you, right? So the title of our session is Sustaining a Critical Stance on Language and Identity in the work that we're doing. So what's sustaining you in maintaining this critical stance? And I'll start. I talked a lot about reading Home is Not a Country by Safi El-Hello over the summer. And I feel like that's transitioning now into the fall. I'm really looking more at middle grade books now that are showing examples of this very dynamic use of language, and reading middle grade books now is just helping me think about the ways I could translate this with students. So it's sustaining me as well. What about for you, Luz?
So I'm going to share this book. So it's called A Child of the Flower Song People, Luz Jimenez, Daughter of the Nawa, and it's by Gloria Amezcua and illustrated by Duncan Tonatiu. And this book is just so present in my mind right now because I recently wrote a bilingual guide for it, the reader's guide for it, for the publisher. And it's something, it's a story that I didn't know. And it's a story of Luz Jimenez, who was a person that was really important in kind of spreading knowledge about Nawa culture, and we share a name. And so just kind of getting to know her story and the way that she contributed, right, to us getting to know sort of the Nawa people, culture, language, Nahuatl language, was just kind of just really nice to learn and to be able to explore a little bit more, and just a nice reminder that there's so much more to learn and so much more to share, with my future teachers and, in spaces like this. So that's what I've been reading, working with lately.
Thanks, Luz. What about you, Michaela? What are you engaging with?
I recently read an article called The Ethic of Care in Teaching, and it's through this teaching fellowship that I'm doing at NYU, which has been kind of a pandemic silver lining that the fellowship is virtual, so I can do it even not being in New York. It gets at sort of caring for and caring of, and community care being self-care, which connects with a lot of things I've been learning and trying to bring into my classroom. And I find that the more I'm in this work and my perspective is shifting, the more intersections I'm finding. So then it's everything is sort of part of this in ways that hadn't really occurred to me before. How about you, Jen?
Okay, so forever gonna plug En Comunidad, because I actually had to open it up again today, like during class when my first period, I was like, this discussion did not go anywhere. And so I was like, I gotta look back, I gotta get this right. And then also I'm using the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop by Felicia Rose Chavez. It's so amazing. And my my co-teacher for English, he, I think, memorized it. So he uses a lot of her writing ideas in our planning. So it's been amazing.
That's awesome.
Okay, so we got to share all this stuff on social media too. Keep an eye out for that. Luz, why don't you show us a little bit of our, oh, wait a second. Can you start?
Okay, so Carla?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking if you could skip straight from here to the framework.
Absolutely.
I think it'll be really important just to set us up with what informs our approach to setting up a critical stance and sustaining it. And a little bit about our agenda. Luz is going to share a little bit on the framework. I'll share on middle school, and then Michaela and Jen will also share some examples from their own teaching. And then we'll have a little chat. Go ahead, Luz.
Yeah. So thank you, Jen, for sharing that about En Comunidad. So of course, we're going to draw from that, right, to talk about the framework that, that continues, that we use in our work and that we use in workshops to just think about how we can, continuously develop this stance. And in En Comunidad, we talk about critical bilingual literacy's approach, which is formed by these 4 guiding principles, right, that we keep going back to, which we developed as a result of our experience as teachers, as well, first of all, as learners ourselves, as emergent bilingual learners, as teachers in our experience as teacher educators, right, and in working with teachers across the country. And so these are the 4 principles that we developed in En Comunidad. So the first one is to constantly self-reflect on our language ideologies. What do we think about language? What are some of those what are some of the ways that those got formed? Why, right? And how does it impact the way that we approach our work with children, our work in classrooms and schools, etc. The second principle is to focus on this pedagogy of unlearning. What is that we have to learn about the ways that we, as society, and we tend to uphold, right, these Eurocentric, racialized language hierarchies. How do we then process this unlearning? How does this unlearning begin? So thinking about focusing on that. And the third piece, the third principle is focusing on an analysis between the intersection of literacies and power and linguistic practices. And we do this a lot through text, and Carla's going to share some of those examples. And of course, we have to celebrate the bilingual linguistic practices, right, of our children, of our students. And how does that reflect throughout in the curriculum, the text that we choose, etc. So what does this look like, right? What do we know that teachers of bilingual and multilingual children do? Well, we know that these teachers, these educators look at language and understand language from a sociolinguistic perspective. How does that actual community use language, right? And we have to honor that dynamic bilingualism of the bilingual communities that we're working with. And we also have to see our students as our co-learners, right? And the community language experts that they are. So how do we use that, rethink our students' role in the classroom and look at them as co-learners? And of course, with that, we have to recognize that bilingualism exists in this continuum. And we are forever learning language and developing language. So it's an important thing to consider when we're working with bilingual and multilingual children, as we know that language is dynamic and language is forever evolving. And for us in our work, Carla, we talk about, how our practice, our teaching and our research really exists at this intersection between translanguaging, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, racial linguistic perspectives, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. And of course, our teachers that do embrace this stance have to reject the reproduction of racial and linguistic hierarchies. So in terms of translanguaging, and I'll explain that a little bit more, is just the ability to welcome and embrace students' entire linguistic repertoire, right? Our students come with a rich language features And so translanguaging just is a practice that is sort of encourages, enables students to draw from that entire linguistic repertoire to make meaning, to make sense, to make connections in the classroom and beyond. And so in Comunidad, we also talk about what does it look like to teach in this way, right? What does it look like to create curriculum that supports this critical bilingual literacies approach? And we talk about the 3 T's: topics, text, and translanguaging. And by topics, we mean, well, what are the topics that are important to the community that we teach? What are the culturally and linguistically sustaining topics that the community is grappling with, and how do we bring that into the classroom? And for the second T is for texts. How do we find those texts that are going to affirm those community language practices and identities, and are in solidarity with the experiences of our children? And of course, creating those intentional spaces for translanguaging, where, and Carla is going to give you some examples of that, of what that looks like, but creating these spaces in the classrooms to welcome students' entire linguistic repertoire, right? These dynamic language practices that they are constantly engaging with in their lives, but how do we bring that into the classroom more intentionally?
Thanks so much, Luz. And the examples that we'll be sharing, it's really important for me and to have to think this way now in my role, is that it's not only for teachers in a bilingual dual language setting, right? It's not only for the children, oh, the children are in a bilingual program, this is the type of teaching that we should have, or more that we should sustain this critical stance on language and identity only in those spaces. No, it's for everyone, right? So whether it's in my English medium language arts class, or Jen's AP English class, or in a Spanish heritage language class, it's everywhere. How can we sustain this kind of stance, right? Where we're constantly thinking about issues of literacies and power, where we're constantly thinking about undoing those kinds of ideologies that have been, again, ingrained in so many systems of education and in our lives, right? So I just wanted to preface that before we go into our examples, and say, like, what Luz just shared is also not just for Luz's classroom of teachers going into, which group of you are you working in your new space, Luz, with teachers? Where are they going off to?
Yeah, so I recently transitioned from Fresno State. I'm now at CSU Channel Islands, as I mentioned. So right now, currently, I'm actually working with teachers or pre-service teachers, but students that are still in, getting their BA, mostly in liberal studies, or recently graduated with their BA and are getting prepared to go into the credential program to follow the bilingual authorization pathway. So they're just like kind of in that between space before going to the credential program. So I'm getting them a little bit earlier than I used to get them.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, start early with this. And speaking of starting early, here's some middle grade examples. So Luz is going to share a screen again, and I will kind of go through some examples that we've shared with teachers, with our own students. I taught rising 8th graders this summer. Now I'm teaching 7th and 8th. So maybe one way is thinking about how can I take a topic and develop a text set around it. And let's say a topic like immigration or migration or existing in the borderlands, and so many texts, so many great texts. I would even add now, like, my 2 border towns picture book that I just got in the mail that was just released yesterday by David Bowles. Oh, y la ilustradora, ¿cómo se llama? I want to say Erika Mesa. Erica Mesa. Yes. It's so beautiful. I have it displayed in my class now, Spanish and English. So yeah, you can add to this text set picture books and all kinds of text, but thinking about a topic, what's going to hold your text together, and what are the practices with translanguaging. So maybe there's annotations, there's analysis of the language use in text. You could play with language use in your own writing. So what I'm planning to do also with my students in my 7th and 8th language arts class is take a look at examples so that they can try that themselves in their writing, but also notice when something is translated, when something is not. So I think we read something that had Arabic and English in our second day of class. It was a Naomi Shihab Nye piece. And we were talking about, like, the power of the word choice. So I can't wait for them to come back, and we'll continue that on Friday, kind of just the next time I see them, to see what they think about the poet's choice of words and when to translate, when not, why to include these dynamic language practices. Another example is that you can take a book like, oh, also, yes, can't leave you without, I mean, yes, I was going to just talk middle grade, but just to give you some young adult examples. Another topic doesn't have to be a topic like of a social issue or something happening in the world. It could be just a genre, and discussing the use of language within that genre. So I'm dedicating the next 4 weeks to dystopian literature, and we're going to be looking at dystopian lit and word choice, and students are going to write their own short story. And I'm excited to see how they choose to write it. So these are some of our favorites. But if you wanted to like go deep into one text, here are 2 examples, and I'll end with this. One example is to take a text and look at the language use and kind of annotate your way through with that language lens and say, when do I see translanguaging happening? This authentic, dynamic language use by bilingual and multilingual people, right? When do I see it happening? And how then can I, as a teacher, use translanguaging pedagogy? So as a method of teaching, and say, we're going to do an analysis of when the author, in this case, Ernesto Cisneros, decides to use, here it's Spanish, in the wonderful award, Pura Bel Pre award-winning book, A Friend Divided. And finally, my last share is the book I read with my rising 8th graders this summer. We read Almost American Girl, an illustrated memoir by Robin Ha. And we had a lot of discussions about the features of different types of English and Korean used in this powerful story about what happens when, this is Robin Ha's life, right, moved from South Korea to Alabama. There was a lot happening, and going to school, learning a new language, learning a different culture. So kind of thinking about what we learn about an author through that type of writing, but then also, what do I do with that, right? So there's analysis of what it's doing to the text when you translanguage, but also what I can use as a writer myself. So those are just some middle grade examples, and I can't wait now to see Michaela and Jen. I know you have some to share from your own class.
Carla, I'm wondering if you want to
Yeah.
share about Safi Al-Hilo, sort of.
Oh, I know another YA short. Let's show it. Let's show it. I have like 30 seconds. Yeah, I was trying to rush, but I think we have time. We have time. Look at me
a
trying to be good with
beautiful
time.
one, yeah.
Oh, because I love this book so much. I know Jen just got it. Jen, I can't wait to hear what you think. I think I'm going to listen to it now next. So it's Safi Al-Hilo's novel, Home is Not a Country, which is a novel in verse. I can take a poem, like one of my favorites is in the beginning, is called America, and think and kind of use this framework that Luz and I talk about in chapter 6 in our book on teaching poetry through the lens of teaching, resistance, and healing, and how poetry can teach us something. It shows a resistance to something, and it can be healing. And so in this poem, there's something about what the character is going through when learning Arabic. There's something there about the generations and resisting assimilation. There's something there about healing and this connection to a culture, but also feeling this disconnect, because it's this teen feeling this kind of like disconnect with their parent, and also within themselves, and trying to be a different person. And then asking students to respond, like, what would your version of this poem be? So kind of following that process. And again, it helps us, going back to the title of this session, sustain a critical stance, or always thinking about the ways we're thinking of the power of language in our lives, and who is supporting dynamic language use, who is not, and which languages get supported and which don't, right? So thanks, Luz, for bringing that in. I'm glad we did have a little bit more time. So yeah, Michaela, okay, there you go.
All right, I'm going to show some examples. Okay. All right. We started school a few weeks ago at my school in Rhode Island, and it's been a few weeks, but we're still in the definitely community building phase for a lot of reasons school-wide. We were virtual for a really long time last year, so everyone's recognizing the importance of that. And through my work with Reading in Comunidad and working with other heritage language teachers, that was a really clear priority as well. So this work has changed my stance with a lot of things in some really explicit ways, and then also more subtle ways as I see all these intersections in things that students are coming across, students are coming up with. So we were norm setting, and these were some things that I believe the 11th grade came up with. They were really concerned about not having judgment. So that made me think about what we've talked about with language and power, that they wanted to be corrected, but they were really worried about judgment from me or their peers in terms of their Spanish, feeling like their Spanish wasn't good enough. They had a lot of really great ideas of wanting to have lots of discussions so we could have a jar of prompts in order to make that happen. With the read alouds, I love the phrase of reading community, and they talked about the importance of one mic for that, but the students being able to read as well as the teacher. Let's see, these are their words, which I loved. This is 10th grade, that they were worried about boundaries. They wanted everyone to respect their physical and emotional space, and didn't want people passing their boundaries. A lot of them talked about the importance of, they talked about respect, and I really tried to push them to think about what that meant to them. So they talked about kindness and what it looked like to respect each other's space, what different people needed, respecting their Spanish. And then this is what we came up with in terms of what they wanted from the environment, what they needed from me, and agreements that we formed collectively. This was 11th grade, and then this was 10th, which has a lot more going on, and you can, I think, see that here, but I really liked the way they were able to break down it. We looked for patterns and what was important to the class as a whole. Yesterday, I was out for a conference and they had kind of a rocky day, and today we revisited the norms and we talked about what worked and what didn't, that we're forming a community and that they are community with or without me. So what do we need to do to reset? I'm going to come back to these jobs in one quick second, but this is what we used for that reset. So I just happened to find this. This is a really powerful account on Instagram that I recommend. And this is, I reworded it to be like student facing, but this is their words. So we talked about what happened yesterday, kind of them, zone of control, what they had control over and what they didn't from yesterday's class, what they could do differently, trying really to only speak for themselves, with the community element being above all. And then we transitioned into this, where they thought about who was someone in the building that made them their best selves, and we wrote them a letter. And that's something I do a few different times throughout the year, like around Thanksgiving, as we try to get away from Thanksgiving, but talk about gratitude. I hadn't done it in this way, and I don't know that it would have occurred to me without the work that we've been doing around critical approaches to language and community. But it felt like, it was so serendipitous to find this on Instagram, but it was like, that's the approach. Like, I wanted them to take responsibility for yesterday's class, but I wanted us to go somewhere really positive from there. And this was kind of a cool thing for them to think about. Okay, so who does make me my best self, and how do we bring that to class? And then just quickly, the jobs. This, I think, is an example of something I've done for years, but I now do in a different, and I think significantly better way, because it has that community lens. And before it didn't. Like, the purpose of us having jobs in class and the reason to do your job well is that it makes us a stronger community. And some of the jobs are specifically reflective of that. So they do a great job. They really have taken to their jobs very well. Like, the person who has the telephone job will also call anyone who needs called. Like, someone wants to go to the nurse, and he's just really thrilled to make that call for us as a group. And let's see, the interpreter is a really powerful job that I love. It's for them, if we have a visitor, whoever it is, they interpret the language as needed, but they also interpret our class systems and procedures, that, like, these are things that we're all really familiar with. We grab our books and read for 10 minutes at the beginning of every class, but the visitor won't know that. That's something that's pretty unique to our classroom. So that student just make sure they can follow the thread of the conversation as needed throughout. we are fully wearing masks in school, and I love and respect that, but it makes it very difficult to drink water. So now someone's job is to remind all of us to drink water at least once during class to take care of our physical health as a community as well. And yeah, those are all my examples for now. Jen, I'd like to pass it to you.
Michaela, before we go to Jen, can you just leave that slide right there you have?
Yes.
Shout out to that is Dr. Dina Simmons, who founded, right, Liberate Ed, so this is the Instagram account, right, that you were, that you've been following. So helpful. So please, we'll make sure we share that on social media as well. Definitely want to follow that for your support in your teacher journey, especially when you think about critical stances. So thank you so much for sharing that visual. It's so helpful. And we got, a beautiful poet, Mahogany L. Brown here, author, quote here. I love it. Thanks so much.
Yes, they are very new, and everything they've done has been amazing. So highly recommend.
Thank you, Michaela. Jen, do you want to share with us what you've been working on?
Yeah. So again, I teach in Minneapolis, and I'm going to share some examples from what we've been up to so far this year. We're on our 4th week already. I can't believe it. I've learned names behind masks. I'm really impressed with myself. So these examples on the slides come really specifically from my Heritage 1 classes. They're 10th graders. For many, it's their very first time ever in a Spanish class. And so part of what I try to do right off the bat is to model vulnerability and to help us build community that way. I wrote a letter, or I write and revise a letter to my students each year. And so in my Heritage class, on our first day together, I read the letter, and I talk about like what to expect from the class, a lot about my teaching philosophy, right? That our goal is progress, not perfection, that our goal is not, my goal is for them to never feel that their language skills are lacking, but rather for us to continue to all grow, right, in all of our linguistic repertoire. And then I share some personal stories, and every year it amazes me how much the students instantly feel that sense of care and love and trust when I talk about how my mom passed away, and when I talk about these deeply personal things in our first time meeting each other, how quickly they are to open up, how quickly they are to say, I'm really excited about this class. I feel like I can trust you. And just feeling those connections after the first day, like I walk out of school on cloud 9 with sore aching feet, but and that has been sort of a staple of my class for the last few years. And then the students do a quick response to that, just thinking about how it made them feel and what they learned. And it's fascinating to see where they go with that. And then we study actually my own letter as a mentor text, and Michaela's, as she's done this as well. And so we came up together with a list of what did we notice from the letter, from the 2 letters. What are some skills that the author used? What are some writing techniques that the author used? And then highlighted in yellow are, we voted on which were the ones everyone should be trying in their letters. And so those were the top 4 for this class. So they chose translanguaging, having a topic or theme that runs throughout, using tone effectively, and specifically changing tone. We talked about how in my letter, there were parts that were really serious, and some that were sad, and some that were funny. We talked about how in Michaela's letter, she had a strong message of empowerment and care for the students. And so they took those cues, right? And they ran with them. And then they also thought it was important to include some personal information, some personal stories in their letters. So another thing I did, so one thing I'm able to do in my heritage class, because all of my students are are bilingual. We don't have newcomers in our classes that maybe don't understand much English. I'm able to use a lot of media and texts in English as our, so we watched Rudy Francisco's My Honest Poem, and it is incredible. And then the students respond to that primarily in Spanish. So the work we're doing is in Spanish, but we're working with a text in English, which is something 10 years ago I never would have done, right? But just having this understanding of, obviously, right, we're all bilingual, therefore we can use all of our languages. And there's so much amazing material out there, right, in many different languages that we can use. And so then my students wrote their own honest poems. And usually when we do a quick write, I ask them to read it word for word to a partner. And with this one, because I asked them to really dig in and try to share some deep personal details. When we shared out, I said, pick a couple lines that you want to share, that you feel good about sharing with your table partner. And I think that went really well. And I think that might be, oh yeah. So then just this week, we're starting working with language practices, which comes from the first unit in Comunidad. We watched the Earthworks Miguel video, and it was really fantastic. It went very differently from when we were online last year, so that's why I was adapting mid-class. But this is just such a big piece to me, talking to students and exploring our own language practices and what does that mean. And I'm seeing the fruits of that work last year with my 10th grade heritage kids in my this year 11th grade English students, who we also did a letter in English. And today I was modeling the writing conference process in class, and I had a student who volunteered to do this. And in her letter, she wrote a letter to her younger self. It was just beautiful. And there's a part where she said, "It's like mom always says." And then the quote from mom was in, 2 sentences in Spanish, right there in her letter. I could have cried. It was just so beautiful. And this is the work that, like, in talking to our English teachers, in years past, students weren't doing that. Students weren't using translanguaging in their writing in their English classes. So that seed gets planted and then it grows.
I love it. So hopeful. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Jen. And this just really shows like the possibilities in a variety of contexts, right? So you teach both heritage language classes, which are in Spanish mostly, right? And then English classes, and the ways that you're able to use translanguaging is so nice. It just really opens up opportunities for children or students, youth, to share themselves a bit more. Thank you for sharing that. Carla, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I thought we have about 10 minutes. We can just close up with some chat. I wanted to have a conversation. I have like 3 questions that I know come up a lot. So I thought it'd be great to just share our responses. And yeah, let's start with the pressing one. I feel like I get this a lot with Luz. It's, how do you support colleagues with this type of work if they're not maybe given the opportunities you have been given, or to attend conferences? I know, Michaela, you were just at the ILA intensive on translanguaging. So you're like immersed in this, right? And then other colleagues who maybe are not yet. So is it a text? Is it a conference? Like, how do you navigate those conversations when you're planning together and you're like, oh, but I went to this ILA intensive, or I read this book, right? And I will start maybe Luz, because you work with a lot of teachers in your classes. Like, what's the advice you give your students who are just starting, that you've taught like first year teachers, those who are just graduating a program, and now those who are just starting. So like, what's your go-to advice for your students who are going to be doing this work and hopefully not on their own?
I mean, that's honestly like one of my main advices to collaborate with each other, to find people that they can work with when they actually get into the classrooms, or even when they start student teaching. When I was running the residency for the bilingual teachers, future bilingual teachers, we used to partner them up with a mentor teacher, and that was really helpful because they didn't feel like they were necessarily alone. And of course, they weren't alone because they had their mentor teacher, but it was just really helpful to have at least one more person that is going through the same thing and learning alongside with, right? And so having that partner was really helpful for them, just kind of navigating through this program together, through the coursework, and through, of course, just their clinical practice. But finding people to collaborate with, right, is always definitely more fun to work with another person, for sure.
I was thinking, well, here you have like Jen and Michaela, you're in the same built like space. Are you're in the same? No, you're not. Oh, I was like, do you collaborate? Are you?
That's my coworker Monica and I.
I was
who
like,
you've
do you
also
ever
met.
collaborate? Because I see you both in a lot of spaces together. So I'm like, are you collaborating that I don't know?
We are collaborating. We're just not in the same building, but we have the internet.
That's where it's happening. I don't know. What about you, Jen? What do you do with either? I know you said your colleague Monica that you've presented with too in the past and collaborated. So how do you support colleagues who are not Monica?
Well, first of all of my colleagues are so amazing, and the environment at my school is one of such like incredible collaboration. But for the past several years, I've been working. So this is my first year teaching English, but I've been an honorary English teacher. I've been an honorary member of the department for several years, and they have been so open to like just listening to my perspective, which I know not everybody gets. But so I've shared your book with them, and just all of the little tidbits. Our school is 85 to 90% heritage Spanish speakers. The other students, many of them speak, come from families with other heritage languages. And so just saying like all of their languages, even if we don't know them, even if we don't ourselves speak them, need to be welcome in our spaces. And talking, with the science teacher who says, well, sometimes I get uncomfortable when the kids are speaking in Spanish and laughing, and I'm not sure what's going on, if they're making fun of someone, or what, and just kind of talking through those scenarios and how we can support the students, right, in their language use, while also making sure that our classroom is a safe space for everybody. And I feel like there's one more thing I was gonna.
No, I think that's a very practical example of what you can do. And this is something I did a lot with my teacher education programs and so I hope you're curating somewhere, like you have a list or a text or a doc, a Google Doc of those scenarios, so that you can return to them in different meetings with colleagues or just one-on-ones and be like, so let me pull up this scenario doc that I have. And it's so helpful to think through, like, how do we respond to different comments, issues coming up? Because then you could, it always goes back to your philosophy of teaching and framework, right? Which Lou shared in the beginning, to like our comments reveal our stance.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Michaela, did you want to add?
I'm sorry.
I started a literary magazine a couple of years ago at school, and we decided that we were going to publish writing in any language. And we say that in every call for submissions, and we're trying to get that. And so since I teach the heritage Spanish, I can get, like, oh, this is a really good piece, you should submit this. And we're trying to get our other students, right, who have different home languages, when even if they're sprinkling in those words and, doing a little bit of that translanguaging and not writing a full piece in their home language, to get them to, to the point where they feel like they want to share that with the community.
Carla, I loved your question about Jen and I being in the same space, because we're far, right? I'm in the East Coast and she's in Minnesota, but
after I said that, I was like, wait, we have Minneapolis, and then
we are geographically far, but
I feel like in the last year and a half, I've seen you in the same spaces. That's
why we have been in the same space. Yeah, I have an 18-month-old, and Jen has seen him since birth in classes and conferences and workshops. So I think finding that community, which Jen's a big part of, has been huge for me in feeling support. And then I can much more easily support teachers that I work with in my school, because I have found this like amazing group of heritage teachers, of language arts, of teachers that are really pushing themselves and using this lens. I do not teach English, but I am similarly an honorary member of the humanities ELA department at my school. That's where I go for department meetings because it's just me. And there is a lot of overlap. So that gives us a great time and like space and medium. They're always really wanting to hear. And then if I go to things that other people aren't at, like the ILA intensive, I made like a 1-pager of notes just that my school can have. There were so many great resources, and like you said, this is for every student, like regardless, it's not just for dual language and bilingual. And there were a lot of really amazing like glossaries out of New York, and one of how to support bilinguals even if you're not one. So it's just like applicable to beyond our space.
Was that a video clip that they shared by Sarah Vogel? Was that
It was
from CUNY NICEB? It sounds like one of those videos.
Yes, it was them. And it was like,
we will be sharing that online. So we'll share it on Twitter. We share it all the time.
Yeah, that was a great one. So I think that connection of like, I am now really supported through the wonder of the internet has led me to be in a good place to support teachers at my school who might need any help with this.
Love it. I love this all. Okay, so now this is a tough one. So we have about 5 minutes left. Oh, we got to tackle this. Challenges that have been brought up maybe by students when you take this lens of whether it's translanguaging that you're calling or taking this critical stance on language and identity. I'll name one. I'll start because I didn't share earlier. I think one challenge that comes up is depending on the types of schooling or classes that students have had before me up to my class, when it's been language arts or a dual language bilingual class or a Spanish as a heritage language class, when they've had language or literacies classes that have focused a lot on the product and not the process, they like hit this wall with me. We're like, wait, it's a very different type of approach where I'm like highlighting the process and I want to nurture you as a writer. I want to nurture you as a bilingual, multilingual person. I want to nurture you as a human being, as a storyteller. How can I nurture your storytelling craft? And they're just like thrown off by that. So I think that's where I'm sitting with that a lot and thinking, how can I help you rethink your writing process? So it's not that you're focusing on a product and my grammar and spelling and all of that, that they've been focused on, like that being number one. And for me, it's like, I just want you to tell the story and we're going to go through the process and editing and I'll support you with that. But it's a very different view of teaching writing. So I've been thinking a lot about that. Any challenges similar come up for you?
Well, I can just share a little bit from my experience, and I think I'm going to share from two things. So number one, of course, I think that my students, they're all kind of on this path already, right? All of them are going to seek to obtain the bilingual authorization to become bilingual teachers, and so they're already, starting with sort of, or mostly bilingual or all bilingual. And so they're already starting with these ideas about their own language, right? About the way that they have been made to feel. And Michaela, this kind of reminds me of what you and your students worked on as a community, right? How do you create a space where everybody feels safe, that their Spanish is not going to be judged, right? And that's something that I work with, and Carla and I did, do this. And we've had this conversation so many times. It's like, how do you make sure that you unpack all of those ideas, internalized ideas that you have about your own language? How do you create those spaces to do that, right? And one way we've done that, and we share in Comunidad, is through doing things like, showing the Earthworks series from Miguel, right? Or Gloria Saldua's piece, and many other resources to help us unpack some of our language ideologies and just kind of help us process and then think about what it means for our work and our future practice as future teachers, future bilingual teachers. In my work with school districts, right, there has been a lot of pushback in terms of translanguaging, like how to, a lot of the districts are very much kind of this traditional language separatist like model, where this is Spanish time, and mostly it's, Spanish English context. This is Spanish time. We're going to protect this. And then this is English time, and we're going to just make sure that we speak English during English time only, right? So there's been a lot of challenge and pushback on bringing our entire linguistic repertoire, the children using their entire linguistic repertoire. But I think slowly, they've been a kind of looking just more broadly about how language works, right? Taking this sort of, or looking at language from a more sociolinguistic perspective, which we shared a little bit earlier, right? The importance of like thinking about, well, how does the community actually use it? How do the children actually use language when they're in the playground, and what are some ways that we can bring that into the classroom and into our programs? So those have been some of the challenges that I faced, for sure. What about you, Jen?
So I'm thinking about a few years ago, I actually had a student in class. We had watched a spoken word poem. I think I can't remember the poet right now. And it was in English, and she talked about like when she was younger, she spoke Spanish, and then she had grown up and sort of lost her language. And so in discussing this afterwards, the students talked in small groups about how their response, their reaction to that that poem. And then when we shared out our responses, I will never forget the student who said, in Spanish, very severely, like, there's no excuse for losing your language. Like and I just was so taken aback. Of course, that shut down the conversation. No one else would share their reactions. And since then, I haven't had that response, but I have thought over what I would do if a student said that again, right? Because it was just so, it came from a place of her earnest belief, right? And probably what had been instilled in her at home, but was just so judgmental and just stopped any conversation, right, about language practices and where we are with that. So that was a really sort of a turning point moment for me. Like, I have to have an answer for some things that I've never considered, right? I have my own three bilingual children who all are in various places on that spectrum, right? And to be like, well, sure, there's lots of reasons. I'm not going to call them excuses. There's lots of reasons that language is lost. And if we look at it statistically, those heritage languages are lost within 3 generations. So clearly there are lots of reasons, right? And we can talk through those, but that was a learning moment for me, and a pushback I haven't received since. My students have really, I feel like, embraced that someone else is embracing, right, their bilingualism, but a big learning moment for me.
Thanks for sharing that. And it makes me think too, as a teacher, trying to get those texts of authors who have been talking about that, right? Like interviews with authors who said like, yeah, I don't feel confident in speaking. There are many authors who say that. I think there was one author who was talking about like their first time having, was it Pablo Cartaya? Beautiful book. I want to say it was like The Epic Fail of Arturo Zamora. It was one of the middle grade, because it's such a like prolific middle grade writer. He was doing his own audiobook, and he got like suddenly like all these nerves for reading the book in Spanish. And so this is like the connection with like Luz's students and your students, right? And thinking of when is it that these questions and these feelings come up, and there's so many reasons, right? I mean, we could, that's a whole other webinar and discussion. But I think definitely getting those clips, and I think that would be a nice set of text to put together on authors and their relationship to their own bilingualism and multilingualism. And why is it that some, whether it was through school, because their bilingualism wasn't supported in schools, depending what languages were supported or not, a family's reason to like saying we wanted to survive and we went through so much. And so their understanding of like, hey, the school didn't have a great bilingual program or nothing at all, so you're just going to go make it with English, right? Those different reasons. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jen. I think it really pushes us to think, how am I responding? What text do I have at my disposal to share? Michaela, was there a challenge you had to respond to recently or something on your mind?
I relate a lot to what's been said. I think I just want to build off that for a minute. It's sort of the intersections of like identity and language and the layers of emotion that can go with that. So like we're saying, all of these reasons of why a student might not feel comfortable in Spanish. Most of my students haven't had Spanish in school before. They speak it at home, somebody speaks it at home, but there's a pretty wide range. And a lot of them, you know, we in class work really hard to interrogate and question the deficit mindset, but they're oftentimes coming in with that, or that's been a message they've received along the way. So that can be a hard starting point, because I also want to value the stories and lived experience that has brought that with it. And sometimes it's family and sometimes it's schooling, that's where that's coming from. Reina Grande is another, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, that's another example that we could put in this, because she, her books are really amazing, and she talked about the challenges and a pretty emotional experience she had in translating her work into Spanish. Because I think that they feel alone a lot of times in that, like, you know, like Jen's student, like even if they don't feel comfortable in their Spanish, but they still have that feeling of like, no, there is a problem with people who are Dominican who don't speak Spanish, even if they put themselves in that category. And it's their lived experience and it's not mine. So I want to be really sensitive to that. And I openly acknowledge that in class, because I think it's important that I say out loud that I'm the white girl teaching them Spanish and they're speaking Spanish at home, and the importance that brings with it. But there's just so many layers to the identity piece that I think is crucial to talk about in class, but can be really hard.
Yes, thank you so much for acknowledging that. In one sentence or less, what is next for you all? Like, is there a project? Is there a lesson, an activity, a book? Like, what's coming up next in your own like professional teacher life goals that's on deck? What's next? Luz, you want to share on what's next for us that we've been working on?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are going to be working with a major publisher to curate a library and to create a set of lessons and guides to help readers, teachers navigate these, and using books across the grade spans traditionally. So from picture books all the way to YA novels. And exploring topics more deeply. And so we're really excited about that. And so we hope we can share a little bit more about that soon. What about you, Jen? What are you excited to work on next?
Okay, that's amazing. I'm super excited. I am sort of still just wrapping my head around being an English teacher. It's not my background, right? So this is, I'm trying to like push myself to like lean into the planning more, as my co-teacher has been teaching this course for several years. And I've got some upcoming presentations, a bunch of them actually, kind of busy this fall. And yeah, I don't know, just revamping everything. I have a colleague now in Heritage Spanish, which is new and exciting. So I'm kind of get to be her mentor. She's brand new, straight out of school. So it's really exciting.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Michaela.
Yeah, I similarly have a couple of conference presentations coming up, and they are combining really well with my plans with school. And the focus for all of that in a couple of different ways is going to be music. So music in the Heritage classroom, protest through music, music as a multimodal text, kind of things that I've wanted to do forever and haven't really made a reality in my classroom. So that's a big plan for the fall.
Wow, that's
so
awesome.
exciting. Okay, so we all have to keep in touch because I want to know what's happening with all of this. So how can you keep in touch with us? Those of you who have been on social media and following along, you've seen I'm a profesora España without the ñ. We have Doctora Luz Yadira. We have Jen there on Twitter as well, and as Michaela You can see more resources. We'll keep sharing on Twitter, but you'll see more resources on my website with Luz here. It is in Comunidad Collective and also on Instagram. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the Ed Collab gathering. So many sessions. And remember, these get archived. So if you don't get to watch them all live, we hope that you find colleagues and support and that you can watch and share and collaborate at other times. Have a great, safe rest of the school year. Take care of yourselves and one another. And we hope to see you in other spaces with all the presentations that Michaela and Jen have too.
Hey, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.